Hey everybody, it's Miss Peachy again from your Biology A class here at Wisconsin Connections Academy. So today we are doing an overview of Unit 2, Lesson 12 in first semester biology, genetic factors in inheritance. So thankfully, this one is also not a super difficult lesson, which is a good thing because I know you had a bunch of really kind of hard ones right off the bat here this semester. But so we're still going to be looking at inheritance, but we're going to be looking beyond kind of our complete dominance, which we kind of started off with in our last video. So in the last video, we talked a little bit about Gregor Mendel and his study with pea plants and how he was able to determine kind of these patterns of inheritance, right? How there are certain alleles that are dominant and those that are recessive. And if you have a trait, it is controlled by a single gene, and that single gene is made up of two alleles. And if one of those two alleles is dominant, then the dominant trait is what is being expressed. If in order to express that recessive allele, you have to have two copies of the recessive allele. Well, unfortunately, Gregor Mendel only had part of the story. So actually, most traits are not controlled by strict, complete dominance. That's just not how it is. There's usually some sort of other thing that's going on. But before we continue, let me remind you that I also have a note sheet that goes along with today's lesson. You will find a copy of this note sheet on our class website, which you can access through our section message boards. So the first thing we're going to talk about is that most genetic traits are actually caused by multiple alleles, not just one gene. So we said before is one gene, you inherit two alleles for that gene, and one comes from mom, one comes from dad, and that kind of controls what that trait looks like. But in actuality, most traits that you have, most characteristics, have more than one gene that are kind of controlling that. And it's a combination of different genes, which is why you can't just see like a few different varieties of things in the real world. You're seeing a whole like plethora of different varieties, right? For example, we oftentimes use eye color as strict dominance and recessiveness, but that's actually false. Eye color is actually controlled by multiple genes, which is why you don't just have people with brown eyes and blue eyes and nothing in between. You have a lot of different shades for eye colors, and you've got combinations of different colors, and people who have multiple colors in their eyes and things like that as well. So a couple different patterns we're going to talk about. The first one is, we'll just kind of remind you, I guess, of our complete dominance. So this is what we talked about before. So this is where one allele is completely dominant over the other. In this case, if one copy of the dominant allele is present, only the dominant trait shows, must have two copies of the recessive allele for that trait to show. Okay, so that's one type of inheritance. That's kind of what we talked about in the last lesson. So the next type of inheritance we're going to talk about, I'll move that guy over here as well. Oh, maybe not. There we go. We'll talk about incomplete dominance. Okay, now incomplete dominance, there we go, make it pink, is oftentimes called blended dominance as well, and I actually prefer that term. And the reason why I prefer that term is I feel like it is more descriptive. It actually tells us more about what's going on than the word incomplete dominance. So I prefer to have very descriptive words. I feel like that's just a way to like lose a lot of ambiguity. Want to be clear. So want to be very, very clear. So think about blending colors, right? So for example, if you had a red flower, we would use the capital R to represent that allele. Okay, let's aptly make this red in color. And if we have get over there, a white flower, okay, you can't really have a white color. We use the capital W to represent the white flower. I'm gonna color this just a very light. I'm gonna color gray because I can't make it white or it would disappear. If we have a flower that is red, it needs to have the genotype RR, 2 copies of that red allele. If we have a flower that is white, it needs to have the genotype WW. Should be, there you go. 2 copies of that allele. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Miss Peachy, you told us you can't use 2 different letters. And that's true. Remember, if you recall, when we did complete dominance way back here, when we did complete dominance, we just used 1 letter. In fact, in this situation, we had purple flowers and we had white flowers. And if a flower was purple, it could be big P to represent the purple flower. But if the plant was white, then we use a lowercase, little p. That's supposed to be a lowercase. This is where P's sometimes are kind of a pain because it's definitely smaller, but it's hard to tell in this picture. Now, that's because you're talking about dominance and recessiveness. The capital letter indicates dominance. The lowercase letter indicates recessiveness. We used 1 letter. The letter is only the letter designated by the dominant allele. When you're talking about incomplete dominance, neither one is more dominant than the other. So they blend together. So we can't use the same letter because otherwise that would indicate one of them was more dominant. So we use different letters. And that lets us know that neither one is more dominant. And we're using capital letters for all of them. So if you cross a big R with a big W, a red flower with a white flower, let's do a little Punnett Square here. Let's see if I can draw one. I don't really know if this is how this is gonna work. But we'll give her a little try, a little college try here. Don't use the pen. See, this is also a pen. Make sure I click that part in before I touch my touchscreen. Okay. So I'm gonna draw a square. See, the one thing about this is that it should. Oh, it didn't. Let's say it should autocorrect that square for me, but it didn't. But oh well, I didn't do a terrible job drawing the square. So here's our Punnett Square. Big R, big R, big W, big W. All right. When we cross them, we get big W, big R, big W, big R. It seems to work better if I press very hard on the screen. Big W, big R, big W, big R. Okay, so they all have the same genotype, which is fine. But now we have a blended genotype. So our genotype, big W, big R, blends the red and the white trait together, and we end up with pink. We have a pink flower. That's cool. I like pink flowers. They're my favorite. So we have blended or incomplete dominance. And in this situation, you represent the alleles with a letter that stands for the color or whatever trait you're looking at. And then when you have one of each, it is a blend of the 2. So the entire flower will just be pink in color. That's incomplete dominance. Our next type of inheritance that's not just strictly complete dominance is something called codominance. And codominance is sometimes mixed up with incomplete dominance. So codominance makes you think of they're both dominant. So they are. However, in this situation, this results in both being equally expressed. They're not blending together. So it ends up in spots and stripes. So, oh, hey, bring your little guy over here. And we denote this a little bit differently. So what we do is, say for example, I'm using, I think in the lesson, they talk about a horse. So say with the horse, you have color. So we use the capital letter C because we're talking about color. And we're talking about a white color, we denote it with a W as a superscript. So the white color, if you have a white colored horse, it would have two alleles that would look like this. And this would tell us that it's white. Okay. And then if we have a black colored horse, again, we use the C to represent color, and we use the B for black. So this is our black horse. Okay. So again, we could do the same thing. We could do another Punnett Square, which we don't really need to do. But if you were to blend them together, or you were to mate these guys together and have a combination CWCB, you would end up with a horse with black and white spots. This pen is better than the other one. They're the same type of pen, but this tip is just a little bit flimsier. So I have this one. I'm gonna have to put a piece of tape on it or something. You can tell my writing is like way better. I've improved. I've been practicing my letters at home. All right, so that's what codominance is. So unlike incomplete dominance, you're not blending the colors. You're not ending up with a gray horse, although the picture kind of looks that way, but it's just the picture. You end up with a horse that's spotted, or you could have stripes. So this is how the striping kind of pattern works in certain animals as well. All right, so an example of this codominance pattern is human blood type. So I don't know if you guys know what your blood type is, but if you don't, you should. You should ask your parents, and if they don't know, they should ask their doctor, your doctor, because it's important information to know. I have type O blood, so I'll give you an example of how my genes are. So there's three blood types. There's three different alleles for blood type. We have the blood type A, and A is codominant. To B. So both these guys are codominant. So like we saw up here, right? They're codominant. We actually write these like this. You write them I don't like this is so skinny. Choose a slightly bigger one. So I with a superscript of A and I with a superscript of B. That's how we write them. And then we have a third blood type, and that's blood type O. O is recessive. So following our naming pattern, we use a lowercase I to indicate that it is recessive. It doesn't get its own letter. It's lowercase. There's no superscripts happening with that or anything like that. So if you have blood type A, you have two options. Your alleles you could be, that's one type that you could be. Get 2 of those, right? Or you could be so if you have one allele for A and one allele, you have 2 alleles for A, you're A. If you have one allele for A and one for O, you're also A because it's dominant to the O, right? If you're B, you could be this, or you could be that. So those are 2 types you could be. If you're type A or type B. If you're O, you have to be 2 lowercase. You have to have 2 alleles for O. That's the only way to be type O. You have to have 2 recessive alleles. Because if you had any other alleles, you couldn't express them because O is recessive. And the other combination you can be is you can be type AB. So if you're blood type AB, then what you would have is you would have this, an A and a B. So you have 2 of the same, or 2 codominant, 1 of each allele. Okay? And okay. That is discussed further down on page 2 here. All right, so we have discussed complete dominance, incomplete or blended dominance, and codominance. So there's just a couple other items that are mentioned in this lesson. One of them is something called polygenic. And I think the word itself is actually fairly self-explanatory here. Polygenic is a trait controlled by more than one gene. For example, height, eye color, as I mentioned earlier, skin color, and as we mentioned at the beginning of the lesson, a lot of traits, many different traits, the majority of them are polygenic in nature. We also have another term that is defined in this lesson, and that's I can't even say this one. Pliotropy. Can't say it fast. I say everything fast. All right, so this is a situation where one gene controls multiple phenotypes. And then finally, our last situation, which is kind of interesting, is called epistasis. And I think epistasis is kind of fascinating. So epistasis is where you have more than one gene. So you've got one specific gene that actually affects the expression of another gene. And the example that they give us is, and I'm going to bring that down here. They give us is a dog. They say that there's 2 different coloration genes for the dog, for brown fur or for black fur or for brown fur. So in the situation, black is dominant, which is indicated by the capital letter A. A is for black. I don't know why they use an A, not a big B. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. So we use A for the dominant black coat and little a for the recessive brown coat. But there's another gene here. There's another gene called the Epistatic Gene, which affects how the pigment is produced and deposited in the hair. And in the epistatic gene, we we'll do E for the epistatic gene. So if it's written as EE or EE, anything like that where the dominant part is shown. So this is sorry guys. This is basically, this is the coloration gene, right? This is our epistatic gene. Okay. So if either one is the dominant part here, the big E is showing it all, then the color gets deposited. And I'm running out of space, so I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. Okay. If the epistatic gene is little e, then the color does not get deposited and the dog is yellow. Which is basically what it would be with no pigment. Kind of like albino, but not albino. Just no pigment in the hair. That says dog, even though it looks like bog. Okay. So we can have a dog that is like this. What kind of dog, colored dog would that be? Well, it's black dog. That's what it is. And if we end up with a dog that looks like this, brown dog. And if you have a dog that looks like this, yellow dog. The only situation where you have a yellow dog is where you're going to have the little e. It doesn't really matter what the other one does at all. If the little e is present, it overrules everything else. And that epistatic gene basically stops the expression of the coloration in the fur. It stops the depositing of the color. So that's epistasis. It kind of actually just cancels out the expression of another gene. Kind of a cool way in which gene expression is controlled as well. All right. And finally, the lesson also refers to how other things can affect gene expression. That genes, because there's always this argument in biology, nature versus nurture, right? That nature is a huge part of how things play out, but nurture, or the environment, has a big impact as well. So exposure to toxins, having, not having a very good diet, so being kind of malnourished during development, all of these things can express if and how genes are expressed and can affect kind of the outcome of an organism. Maybe that organism doesn't grow very tall because it didn't have a lot of nutrients as a developing embryo or in, the kind of early stages of development. So there are also environmental factors that can affect gene expression. So that's it. That's a summary of Unit 2, Lesson 12. Again, genetic factors in inheritance. Hopefully a little bit easier than this little one that was like 2 lessons ago, which was a little bit difficult. So that's the end of this one, guys. Hopefully you learned something, and I will see you in the next one.